kick off with introducing yourself. Well, I will start off by saying you and Scott have been good friends for many years. I love what you do. I've been not only a friend, but a fan of yours. All of your wines that you make really all over the world, from California, Sonoma, Alexander Valley, to New Zealand, to Chile, everything that you do, you seem to have the golden touch. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I know some of our viewers have heard your bio before, but quick and dirty, how did you get into the business? What is it about the business that you love? And you've had a fascinating career, so touch on that maybe.
Yeah, no, I've been very lucky. I was, the wine life is a wine of chances, not only from a visitation standpoint, but also about who you meet and who you bump into. And I've been, my first break, obviously, I left New Zealand for the first time in 1982, went to Australia and went to university there. So 2 degrees from New Zealand, 2 degrees from Australia. And it was that Australian connection that really gave me the bump into what high quality wine was all about. And then in 1989, I came to California the first time, went to Chile for the first time in 1990, came back to, I was actually in France in 1990, ready for the harvest, and got a call to come back to California. So I got the job at Simi, winemaker at Simi. I was 27 at the time, and just right place, right time, and got the job and stayed for 14 years. And during that time, we were owned by Louis Vuitton. And they put me in charge of blending for North America for the still wineries that they own. So Louis Vuitton owned Cloudy Bay, Cape Mentelle in Australia, Ruffino in Italy, Terrasses in Argentina, Roses in Portugal, and Simi in California. So that was the really big break. And then we got sold to Constellation in 1999. So I ran, Constellation was a much smaller company back then. It was called Icon Estates, made up of Franciscan, Estancia, Blackstone, and Ravenswood. So I sort of helped them along. And then the only job change I made was in 2003, and I went to run Allo to Mac Wine, which was the world's largest wine company in the world. They owned 58 wineries in 7 countries. So I got to travel extensively through those countries and work with those winemakers. And then we were sold to Jim Beam and did the same thing for Jim Beam. So brands you would know would be Clos du Bois, William Hill, Atlas Peak, Gary Ferro, Buena Vista, Campo Viejo, Marcus de Arenzo, ECL's Tarsos, Villeray, Brancott, Stone. So it was a huge multinational company, and it was a great privilege to work for them. And the people that I met are just brilliant, and they're still all friends of mine today. So I get to travel the world and to all around the place and meet great people. And I consult. Obviously, I consult in 6 countries, but I don't think I'm that great. But what I do have is, if anyone has a question that I can't answer, I'm a phone call away from somebody that knows it really well. So that's really the advantage.
Yeah. Well, I think, when I think about wine and what I've come to know, the little that I know about it, I think it comes from experience, tasting a lot of different wines, being a buyer, on premise, you get exposure to a lot of different wines. So when people ask me, how do I get to know wine well, to be able to taste wine and recognize wines? I think that there's really only one answer: be around it a lot. And I don't know, listening to your background, I don't know that who's been around more wines in more diversified locations and climates and regions than you have. So all of that experience, you're also very humble, but that's gold. That's what creates that golden touch. So when you taste a wine, you can draw back on all of the relative glasses of wine that you've tasted in your life, and be able to say, we need a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. If it's a blend, or if it's harvest time, possibly needs to ripen a little more or a little less, maybe.
Yeah, I think that we can, we can all make wine. Look, making wine is easy. But how do you make a wine that represents who you are, the place you're from? And I see this a lot. This is, let's face it, man, I work with some amazing winemakers. I'm so privileged to walk into their houses and drink their wine and have a barbecue with them, because I have two things. Like, firstly, life is too short, right? The average white guy lives to 84 and I'm 59. I've got 25 years left. That's 9,125 bottles of wine left to drink in my life. So if I drink one bad bottle of wine, it's like throwing a good one against the wall. But thanks to COVID, I've had a lot of kids move home. I'm easily going to hit 10,000 bottles. The other thing, so volume and experience and understanding, like drinking wine, just train your palate, train your nose, train, you got to live and breathe that culture and the quality. The second thing is the difficult piece, and that's how do you relate? Like when I walk into a vineyard and pick up the soil, and I look at that grape that has resulted, and I taste it, and I drive tractors too. So in the weekends, believe it or not, I drive tractors on my own vineyards because I'm actually a viticulturist and I love that part of the vineyard business. But things are changing as we become more sensitive to, okay, we could argue about organics and biodynamics and whether we're, blowing the carbon out of the soil, and we could argue this all the time. What that does though, what those conversations do though, is it makes you go out and think about it, make you out and have a look at it. And I know that as we become more organic, and I'm not putting that on my label, but I am farming organically, is that my acid and pH profiles are completely different. I mean, people ask me all the time, like, so what's the difference of growing a vine organically or not organic? Firstly, it's more expensive to grow it organically. But secondly, what we consider to be, flavor does this and sugar does this and tannins do this, and how they all come together in terms of taste was one thing. But now that we're farming organically, those profiles are completely different. So I believe that we can make wine at lower sugar, but with much better acidity, and the pH is actually more relative now than acidity is. So there's always a learning curve. And I could also throw in this thing about calcium carbonate. Everyone talks about, calcium carbonate soils are really important. The great Burgundies of the world are made in those soils. Well, I mean, we're using concrete tanks. Okay, in 1982, my first vintage, we just dug a hole in the ground and dropped a bunch of concrete sewer pipes into the ground. Those were tanks. Those were concrete tanks. And there's calcium carbonate in that concrete. And then, suddenly, here we are 30 years later, concrete tanks are cool again. Well, it's a pendulum. Wild ferment, native ferment, low SO2, concrete, less wood, more stainless. I mean, there's a pendulum and everyone's running around. But how, when I sit down in Colchagua and drink a glass of Cabernet with the winemaker, with Gabrielle, the winemaker there, and how does this taste different to what I'm making in Alexander Valley or Napa Valley? And unless I can make Cabernet from all these areas: Colchagua, Cachapole, Mayapole, McLaren Vale, Barossa, Alex, Napa, you name it. But how are they all going to taste different? And when you sit down, I can see that. I can see that point of difference. And that's hard.
Let's take a little drink break. And I want to go to Alexander Valley and one of my favorite wines. Hold it up here, the Verge. So we're going to start off with a Cabernet, a pretty good one. I see you got the same wine. So you're the expert. You made this. I only drink it, and I drink a lot of it, and so do our fans. They love it. This is one of our best-selling wines. So as we taste this, if you don't mind, maybe you can tell us a few things that you notice as a winemaker.
Well, I can, Jerry, I can share my screen here and show you a couple of slides of the actual vineyard. But basically, it's in 2008, it was really difficult to, these are my 5 kids, this is why I'm drinking 10,000 wines during COVID. They're really pushing me along. So if we look at so in 2008, it was really difficult for a lot of growers. A lot of big companies were canceling contracts. 2008, the economy was not that good going into 2009. And so a lot of these growers didn't have a route to market. And so what I wanted to do was help these growers who had helped me through my corporate life, help them now move to the next stage, because, they were producing 20 ton, 40 ton, relatively small vineyards. not the 100 tons that the bigger companies found it easier to deal with. One of these such vineyards is Pasalacqua. And Pasalacqua, it's an old family. There's 7 children that inherited this property, and I've known the family for years. And so this was one of the properties that became available. So if you head north from Healdsburg, I'm sitting with his blue dotters right now. If you head north past Semi Winery, where I used to work, you're on Healdsburg Ave, and you jump off and you'll see Pasalacqua Road, and you wind all the way down Pasalacqua Road, and you end up in this magnificent vineyard. And so this is the property where we make the Cabernet. It's southeast facing, which is really cool. So the east is important because it has morning sun, and so the sun comes in this direction, and so the west is protected by this shadow of the hill, so we don't get the afternoon burn. And so that's what makes it really successful. The verge to me means, like on the edge, and the key elements for us is the mid part of the slope. So we call it the Piedmont part of the slope. So we're not at the top of the hill where we get like a lot of free draining soils, and we're not at the bottom of the hill where we get a lot more water. And so I typically pick it a little bit earlier than some of the other vineyards because it's smaller berry, it's dry farmed, and you can see that when you look at the wine, it's extremely purple. And that's because Cabernet I hate to talk metric. Cabernet weighs about 0.9 grams, 0.95 grams, but a berry from this vineyard weighs about 0.8. So the skin to pulp ratio is much higher. So when you look at the wine, you're going to see a lot more purple hue to the color. And then when you smell it, you're going to get the classic Alexander Valley, which is, if you always describe the difference between Alexander Valley and Napa Valley, Alexander Valley is going to give you a little bit more. Remember, Alexander Valley is cooler than Napa Valley. So Alexander Valley is going to give you a little bit more acidity, but it's going to give you more red fruit. So you're going to get sort of red cherry, blueberry, black cherry, that sort of range of fruit. And then when you think Napa, you're going to get the black, you're going to be down a notch. You're going to go black cherry, plum, blackberry. So you're in that darker fruit. So Alexander Valley is more red fruit, Napa Valley is more black fruit. So when people ask me, well, when do I drink the Verge versus when do I drink something from Napa? Well, I'll tell you that during dinner, I drink Alexander Valley, because Alexander Valley has a little bit more acidity, a little bit more charm. And when you drink this wine, I get all the sweet, rich fruit, but I just get this, a little bit of acidity that keeps your palate alive, and it makes you go back and have that second glass, or makes you hungry. And that's really what it's about, is enjoying that wine over food. And at the end of the dinner, that's when I drink the Napa, because I eat a lot of cheese, and so I'll drink the Napa wine at the end of the evening when my palate's tired, and because Napa's got higher alcohol and more tannin, whereas Alexander Valley is much, that fine tension, and you just get that explosion right on the back of the palate, and that's what I really like about Alexander Valley.
Well, I think that explains why I particularly like it. I would not consider myself a big Napa Cab drinker, even though we're here today. We gathered because it's Cabernet Day. I guess my palate tends more towards old world stylings, and I'm a bit of an acid junkie. I like higher acid wines because predominantly when I'm drinking wine, it's with food, and I really like that. And I love that brightness that comes in wines from the old world, whether it's Bordeaux or Burgundy or this Alexander Valley fruit. It's brighter to me. It's a little less heavy, like you said, and a lot of that's due to the alcohol content. So those are things that are right up my alley. And I guess that's a subjective, different people love different things. And, we have plenty of fans out there that love Napa Cab, and we're going to taste the Napa Cab. I think that'd be our third wine. So it's what you like the best. And I tend to go towards the Verge personally. So cheers. Thank you.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we brush over, we talk about alcohol a lot, but because everyone understands alcohol, sugar converts to alcohol. But what we don't understand, we understand it, but we don't talk too much about it. When sugar decreases during the fermentation and alcohol increases, if you start at high sugar, you end up, there's two forms of sugar. There's glucose and fructose. And fructose is a much smaller percentage, but it's much harder to ferment. So as the yeast ferment the glucose to alcohol, they're gradually killing themselves, because the higher the alcohol goes, the harder it is for the yeast to live. So at the end of the fermentation, if the fermentation stops, you'll end up with a little bit of this fructose, and so you get this fake sweetness. So if you were to put 2 grams of glucose in your mouth and 2 grams of fructose in your mouth, the fructose will taste sweeter. And so that sweetness sticks. So when you have a higher alcohol wine, when you're over 14.5, 15, you know my friends, and well, I make wine over there too, but you end up with more of that sugar. And so even though the wine is called dry, it actually tastes sweeter. And that's what it's not the alcohol. The alcohol exhausts the palate for sure, but in combination with this extra sugar that you normally get. So we classify under 2 grams of sugar dry, because the human threshold's at about, well, some people are at 7, but most are about 5 grams per liter. So we call dry 2 grams and under. It's impossible to be 0. But a lot of these wines at higher alcohol, they're at 4 or 5 sugar, and most of that's fructose. And so you get this heaviness, this blackness, this licorice character, this heavy sweetness. And that's what wears the palate out. So when you say you're a francophile, or like a lot of the old world type wines, I think for me, of course, I have to be there to drink them. If I'm in France or I'm in Italy, yeah, I'm going to drink old world wine. When I'm here, though, I drink California wine. But I think there's something to be said for that style of wine. It's a lightness and a freshness that you get in those European wines. And I feel that the Alexander Valley in particular is much closer to that than what we do in Napa. And I also think that in other parts of the world, particularly high-end wines out of Chile or Argentina, we're in that same vein as well. We've learned how to make sure we plant on good soils. We manipulate the vines to make sure that they're in balance so that we can pick them at lower sugar.
Beautiful. Great explanation. Makes perfect sense. Moving on. And
Let's change the subject.
Let's segue into, and this is the fun thing that we're doing today. We're tasting 2 cabs, and I made the command decision to put this beautiful Merlot right in the middle of the 2 of them. See if we can tell, or does it cleanse the palate? What does this do? And tell us about this.
Well, it all started, the stories. So I have 5 children, as you saw, and I make wines with my daughters. And for those who are fathers, I think that having a project to do with your daughter, it's amazing that daughters really don't talk to their fathers between the ages of 13 and 19 for some reason. And so having a project actually forced my children to talk to me, taught my daughters to talk to me. So it's been a great project. It started in 2000. I was telling my children that when I lived in Chile back in 1989, 1990, Pinochet, who was the dictator, he would cut the electricity, he'd cut food off, oil, whatever, power. But so we had to make wine without electricity. And so I was telling my children this. And so we made half a ton of grapes in 2000 with no electricity. So, we hand-picked it, we handy-stemmed it, which is very laborious, pigeage, punch down, made the wine. And we bottle it each year, and we call it 5 Gold Hands, because my last name's Goldschmidt, 5 Gold Hands Unplugged. Anyway, that particular year, Chelsea wanted to get involved, and she said, "Can I make a wine with you?" So that's how the project started. And so she's a firstborn like myself. And so making wine with a firstborn is really interesting, because she's totally anal. Everything has to be totally perfect. She likes Cabernet. So this is a Cabernet drinker's Merlot. And let me show you, again, I'll just show you the vineyard. Let's jump through a few. It's a bit slow to react, of course. Let's jump through a few slides here, and we'll get down to the Merlot. But Chelsea's the oldest, and if you line up the labels, you can see that Chelsea and Hilary face to the left, and Catherine faces to the right, because Catherine's the middle child. So she thinks outside the box. She's the liar, the manipulator, the creative artist, if you'd like to say that. So she thinks outside the box. So she faces the other direction. So you know what middle children are like. They're all the same. Anyway, so when Chelsea was 2, I traced her around her head, and then she colored it in, and that's where the label comes from. And so making wine, and we chose to make a Merlot with her. It's from a vineyard just to the northeast of Healdsburg, where I am. And it's a vineyard that I've been making wine from since 1990. So what is that, 30? In fact, we're picking the vineyard right now. Believe it or not. It's we're picking it this morning. So this will be what is this, 2021. So this is my 32nd vintage from that vineyard. So I know how it behaves in good years, bad years, inclement years, low crop years like we're getting this year. Normally you get about 22 ton off this vineyard, and we're only going to get 18. I just had to report it. And it's a single vineyard. We call it Guidestone Rise. And there's been a lot of conversation about single vineyard being, is that a really unique selling point, or is it really important? For me, yes, because for me, it takes me to the history of the site. So I've been making wine from this one site all this time. Yes, it limits the amount of tools that I can put in my tool belt, but it actually truly represents that particular vineyard, this particular person, the cultural aspect of the Delormier family, who have been growers for me for over 30 years. And then we don't blend it. It's a single varietal. It's a single vintage. And remember, Merlot is still the #1 red grape in the world. Pomeroy's not bad. Haut-Briond's not bad. Petrus is not bad. They're all Merlot. But people seem to get hung up on Cabernet. But if you don't like drinking high alcohol Cabernet, and if you don't like pepper or green spicy notes, because that's what Cabernet gives you, drink Merlot. And you can usually get it at a better value. I will say there's one key element with Merlot, and that's the water holding capacity, the soil. So this soil that we grow Merlot on has a little bit of clay in it. And I learned this again in Chile with Cabernet. Cabernet is the latest grape variety that we harvest. And we plant it on pure clay soils because you have much more water is held in a clay soil than a loam soil. So we try to find vineyards with a little bit more clay on it, and that's where we grow the Merlot. And this is no exception. That's why this wine is so intense. And when I bring it into the winery, I can extract the heck out of it, because I know it's always going to be full and rich, because that berry hasn't dehydrated and it's got a lot more, a Merlot berry weighs 1.2 grams, whereas I was talking the Verge weighs 0.8, so it's completely different winemaking.
Well, here's what's interesting to me. So I know what's in the glass, but if I didn't know what was in the glass, I could easily mistake this for, I'd say a Napa Cab, because to me it's a little rounder, although it has a nice bright acidity, and kind of knowing that it's Merlot and having tasted as much wine as I have, I can pick apart the elements that make it Merlot. But you mentioned something that, this is a cab drinker's Merlot. And I would agree with that 100%. But I've got two questions for you. What makes it a cab drinker's Merlot? And then on the last slide, you had the last bullet point you had said vegan. Yes. And I know what you mean by that, but I'd love for you to address that to our audience.
Vegan is it's a controversial thing. Most European wines are not vegan. In fact, most California wines are not vegan, because we blame the Greeks for a lot of things. They invented a cork when in fact probably a screw cap is better for wine. But way back when, the Greeks used to transport wine across the universe, and they used to use, this is before Christ, obviously. So they used to put wine in this, instead of putting in a barrel, because a barrel rolled around on a ship, they'd put them in the swim bladder of a sturgeon fish. This sturgeon fish, and when they arrived at their location, the wine was cleaner than when they put it in the sturgeon fish's bladder on departure. And when they arrived, the wine was clean. Then they got the idea, well, why don't we just put the sturgeon fish, grind it up and put it into the tank? And sure enough, it worked. And then they played around with eggs and milk and blood and all these other non-vegan products. And today, eggs is probably the big one. Most wineries probably still use eggs, egg whites for fining agent. It's very traditional in Europe, very traditional in France, and very traditional here in California. Isinglass, which is the original sturgeon fish that we talk about, is still quite commonly used. and milk is commonly used. So these things are all vegan. So I believe in not using any fining agents at all and keeping the wine as natural as it is. So the disadvantage by not using fining is sometimes when you drink a wine, you'll get a kick of tannin right on the finish. And that's because I'm not using any fining agent to take that little kick of tannin off. And that's why you use fining agents, is just to soften the wine or round out the wine. How do we make it Cabernet? Well, as I said, because the berry remains in really good turgor because we have this clay soil, I can extract it like a Cabernet. So I give it the Cabernet extraction technique, which is fairly aggressive for good soils. And I find that with Merlot, because it's such a juicy variety, being a bigger berry, I can extract it a little more strongly. I would not do it on a thinner soil where I would have some dehydration and things like that. I don't want, I certainly don't want to over extract Merlot.
That aggressive extraction that you're talking about, do you feel like it adds to the tannic structure? It definitely adds to me what I'd call the beefiness, almost the masculinity of the wine, if I can. Do you feel that way?
I don't. Maybe using really the term aggressive is a bit strong. So, like a traditional winemaker would ferment at 30 Celsius and pump over 200% a day. Okay, I don't do that. I ferment it like, my aggressive is 26 to 28, so it's colder, so I'm getting actually less extraction. I certainly don't pump over anywhere near that amount. I'm on a really strong day, like mid-ferment, where we're really trying to control the temperature, I might pump over 75 to 100%. So I'm less than half of what a typical Cabernet producer does. So even though I call it aggressive, it's not aggressive as most people. And most people like to be aggressive because it feels good, you know. It's really cool to turn the pump on and spray the wine all over the top of the cap or punch it down like a Pinot Noir. It feels good. It feels like you're actually making something. But in reality, for me, it really depends on the season. So this season, I look out the window here, it's 70. Believe it or not, we're going to have a high today of 71. So it's not really very hot, but it has been, and we have no smoke, by the way. We are going to have a lower crop because we've had this drought. So the berries will typically be smaller. So this year, I'm going to extract even less. I'm probably going to ferment everything at about 26. My pump over regime is going to be closer to 50% because I do not want to over extract. I mean, look, we all sit around and vacillate on, you know, how many tons per acre we got or how much we're doing this and that. But 2 years from now, when I sit down and have a glass of this Verge with you, Jerry, we're not going to discuss any of that. All we're going to discuss is how it tastes, you know. So the quality, like people say to me, oh, I don't know if we can afford that, you know, putting more labor into the vineyard or doing an extra tuck or a leaf removal or crop. Like 2 years from now, when we sit down and drink this wine, you're not going to remember that it costs another $150 an acre. People forget. Quality, the only cost for quality is this. What does it taste like? And what's the story? And is it relevant? And can I have and the big one is, you know, can I have that second glass? And that's really the key.
Right on. Well, I think this is a nice tribute to daughter number one. And you know, her namesake is some pretty good wine. And I agree with you. It's a cab drinker's Merlot. And Merlot occasionally still gets a bad rap from the sideways days, but really a lot of people are rediscovering that it's really good drinking wine.
Yeah, the other big change about Merlot is because Merlot is hard to sell for, let's say after the Sideways movie for the next 10 years, it was hard to sell. So a lot of bad Merlot was pulled out of the ground. So Merlot was on a huge trajectory to, you know, take over Cabernet. So what happened was a lot of Merlot was planted in hot climates in the Central Valley, Central Coast. It's not ideal down there. You need the cooler Alexander Valley to grow good Merlot. So if you stick to Alexander Valley and look for Merlot, you're probably going to enjoy yourself a little bit better than if you drink something that's labeled California or even labeled Sonoma or Napa. remember, Sonoma has 14 appellations. One of those appellations is Alexander Valley.
Right on. Right on. Okay. You ready to jump back into Cabernet, a big heavy hitter?
Yeah, my little daughter, you know what? She did this little video for me. I wish I'd put it on this Zoom call, but she loves to imitate me. She lives at home with us. She's at UC Davis. We have three chemists and 2 physicists as 5 children. It's pretty funny. So she's one of the chemists. She's doing bioengineering. So she likes to imitate me. And I wish maybe I'll send you the video later, Jerry, but it's pretty hilarious. So yeah, Hilary, she's 19. Blending and working with Hilary is completely different. So when I blend with Catherine and Chelsea kind of sort of think the same. There's a piece of the vineyard in the Catherine vineyard, the Catherine Cabernet, which has this kick of tannin, and we always argue about how much of that product, how much of that component we're actually going to put in the final blend. So when I drink Catherine, I can see Catherine. I can see that she likes that tannin feel. Now with Hilary, being last born, her attitude is a little bit different. So the vineyard is broken up into 3 blocks, and so she wants a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. Whereas for me, I normally go, well, 2 of the 3 this year are better than the other. But she'll always go, well, I want 30, 30, 30, or 30, 40, 20. I mean, she's always playing around with it. And it's quite interesting blending and tasting with her. I'll just show you the location of this vineyard, which is pretty cool. I do have a video of Chelsea, but we'll run over that for a second. And get into, so we make a lot of Cabernet. We're tasting Hilary today, and this is Hilary. The vineyard, though, is, if you head south on 29, this is Mondavi, this is Nickel and Nickel, and that's Opus. And so this vineyard is sandwiched right between Opus and Nickel. And then we have this vineyard here. This is Oakville Cross, Rutherford Cross. Rutherford Cross is right here. And we're Oakville Cross here. So this is Napa Wine Company. We have this vineyard here as well. And then our prima donna vineyards are just down here called Game Ranch, which are just a little bit further down. But anyway, this is the vineyard.
But there is the beautiful Nickel Winery and their vineyard. And that's Hilary down there at that end, and there's Opus, beautiful Opus, out here in the Oakville, getting ready to pick Hilary tomorrow.
So you can see the location is pretty cool. You know, I always, and yet it gets really great scores for an Oakville Cabernet. Remember, Oakville for me is the primo appellation. I mean, a lot of people talk about Rutherford up there. Obviously, you've got Camus and a lot of other wineries, but for me, Oakville, the tannins are a little bit more silky in Oakville, whereas in Rutherford, they're a little bit more grainy. Some people like that. I like that too, but I like the silkiness, especially for an approachable Oakville. This is definitely the best value Oakville on the market. It's very, if you think about the wineries already mentioned, plus, you know, Screaming Eagle, Harlan, Maiden, Minor, Silver Oak, Groth, Plumpjack, that's Oakville. And so you know that those wines are well over $100, well north of $100, and yet this wine's going to retail at $55, $60. So this is definitely the best value Oakville on the market.
Yes, absolutely.
So this is when we're arguing. I was arguing with her about how high, you know, 30 mils is in a measuring cylinder. I've only been doing this for 40 years, Jerry, and here she is arguing with me about you know, how many mils go in a cylinder. Like, dude, get over yourself.
That's the confidence.
So anyway, blending with her is really cool.
I can see Emmy doing that. Yeah, the confidence of you. Well, Hilary's wine kicks butt. I mean, that's all I can say. This is an outstanding, big, rich, ripe, bold. It's for those folks that love Napa and those folks that love Oakville. This has everything that you're looking for in there. You know, the nose is great. It has that little cedar, you know, the tones that I want from a high end, you know, oak impression with the wine. The the mid palate and the mouthfeel is phenomenal. It's got very ripe, rich, luscious fruit. The tannins are silky. It has that, just beautiful fine tannin grain to it. The finish is long and lovely. It's absolutely beautiful wine. And you're right about the value. Oakville Cabernets have just almost priced themselves out of most people's, most people's budget, unless it's your birthday or you're working on Wall Street or something like that. But this really rocks for, we carry this wine occasionally, and it's under $100 on our list, which I'm pretty proud of.
What? You're giving it away, Jerry. You're giving it away.
Giving it away. So for under $100, this is the whole deal.
Yeah. No, I mean, normally you would see that, like if you go to Healdsburg, well, they don't sell Napa wines here in Healdsburg where I live, but over in Napa, this wine would regularly be 120, 140 on a list.
Yeah.
So if you're selling it south of 100, man, you're offering your customers something really unique. And it's hard, as you say, because of the price, it's really hard to try wines from Oakville. It's a sort of a missing link because of the prestige of all those, and Tokalone and Pritchard Hill are also part of Oakville. So you're talking about the prima donna, for me, as I said, the prima donna piece of Napa Valley. Yeah.
Right. Well, I tell you what, on National Cabernet Day, this is a pretty good way to go through the day, tasting a couple of great cabs and then a Merlot that tastes like a cab or holds its own for sure.
I think it's I think the three wines really interesting to line up. And I like if you pour at home in that order, Verge, Chelsea, and then Hilary, I think it's a good way to do it. People wouldn't, I'm going to start with a Merlot. Well, Merlot is a little bit more fleshy, a little bit more weighty. And I think that if you start with the Verge is going to give you like a little bit more of that little zing, that little bit of acidity. It's going to perk your palate up. And it's like what I said earlier, I'm almost 60 and my palate's exhausted. So I've got to have like something that's going to wake me up and rip me up and, create that tension in life. And I think the Verge is a really good way to do it. I think then you drink the Merlot, and the Merlot's got that wash, that complete wash over the palate, rich and round and lush. And then finish with the Hilary that's got a little bit more of that black fruit. The oak thing is really interesting, as we go through time, and I think, and again, I've learned a lot of this off my clients. So, Napa Valley and 2000, 100% new wood, pick it at 27 bricks, water it back to 24, alcohol at 15, pH of 3.8, and it's a concocted wine. And we started making these 100-point wines. So I've had just got another 100-point wine last week. But when I look at the wines that have, and usually it's one wine that continues to get the 100 points, And if you look at those wines, they're much more simplistic. They're very true to type, lower alcohol, better acidity, less wood. This is fruit, man. This is a living, breathing, evolving product. I mean, if you put wood on it or tannin or sugar or whatever it is, you're manufacturing the wine. And I think the Hilary for an Oakville Cab is as close as you can get to it. There's term natural. I don't like this term natural, but it's as close as natural wine as you can get, which is part of it. The other thing that we talked a little bit about with the extraction, as wines age, you get that crusty stuff here on the side of the bottle. And for me, that's bad. If you see that crusty stuff, unless it's the year you got married, the year of your first child's birth or graduation, get rid of it, because what that is that's polymeric pigment. And you can see that in the wine. So when a wine's young, it's purple. It goes from purple to red to brown to orange. And purple and red are what I want in my wines. I don't want my wines to go brown or orange, because as they do, they're losing color, they're losing the acidic, the tannin tension, and they're losing acidity, and that's what it is. So you have this compound, it's called an anthocyanin. It's from the Melbourne 3-glucoside flavanol family. This anthocyanin has got it's 3 benzene rings and a couple of hydroxyl ions. It joins on another one. This is tannin, this is red. So this is purple, anthocyanin. This is red, it's a tannin. Those 2 hydroxyl ions join, they become a water molecule, they cleave off, and this compound gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is what we call polymerization. That's crusty stuff, and that's why the wines lose color, lose acid, lose tannin, and become brown. So don't drink brown wines because, they're evolving too fast. And as the wines evolve, they're becoming, heat, light, air, and time are what makes wines age. And this is why I love drinking wine, not beer or vodka, because every time I go back to the glass, it's different. Every year I drink it, it's different. The goal with beer is to make it the same every day. I made beer for 3 years. Trust me, it was the most boring job I ever had in my life. So making wine is an evolving, changing. You can celebrate anything with it. The year, I mean, I don't know. It's crazy. I love wine, and I love the fact that we can, so I extract during the skin contact, because when the skins are there, the wines become a lot more stable. So my wines will not go brown or orange. They will stay purple and red. So when Kim Jong-un drops a nuclear bomb on California, we all run to the bunker. What are you going to take? If you show up with your 1 bottle of a very, very expensive Oakville wine, and I show up with my 3 6-packs of Hilary for the same price, who are they going to let in? And I know it's not going to go brown or orange.
Well, that's an uplifting thought, and I think a good message to segue on to some of our questions. I've been handed a list.
Sorry.
Some questions.
Sometimes I get carried away.
Hey, rock on, man. That's what makes these things interesting. Look, question number 1, what is the preferred temperature to serve Cabernet?
The quick answer is take the white wine out of the fridge 20 minutes before you drink it, and put the red wine in the fridge 20 minutes before you drink it.
Right on. Or let's say 55 degrees?
Or 55 degrees.
Okay.
Whatever comes first.
Perfect.
I don't know. I think in general, I think that we drink, and we know, we discuss this all the time, we drink our red wines too warm. And if you keep them a little bit cooler, you're going to get more of an acid profile. The alcohol will seem less obvious. And again, it'll, body temperature is not actually that bad a thing, So trying to keep the wine cooler than your body is a good idea.
Yeah, I like that, particularly here in Houston, Texas. And our team here,
absolutely.
I got to give Taylor and Emmy kudos. We're in their offices filming this, and they had the wines iced down for about 20 minutes before I got here. So they were all drinking at perfect cellar temperature. Question number 2, Nick. Oh, it's both of us. Do you both know any other countries that produce great cabs? I bet you do. And if so, how do the flavor profiles differ from California Cabernet Sauvignons?
Oh my goodness, that's like a 1-hour talk.
This is going to be a great episode for our wine geek friends.
Yeah, I know. Wow, the quick answer, my quick answer to that question is, where am I drinking it?
Mm-hmm.
Because, look, I went to Austria last year. I'm sitting there in Vienna, and I'm drinking Gruner Veltliner, eating a Wiener Schnitzel. That was the best Gruner I've ever had in my life. And then I came back here.
Yeah, sorry? You can't get good Cabernet in Austria, right? Am I right?
Well, you can.
No.
That's what I was leading up to.
Okay.
So I'm drinking Gruner on the canal, eating a schnitzel, and then I came back to California, go buy a bottle of Gruner, make a schnitzel, and try and have the same experience. It doesn't work. It doesn't seem the same. Gruner, I drank Cabernet in Austria. I bet when I'm sitting in France, I love drinking wines of the table, whatever the heck they're pouring, and because it goes with their food and whatever. But I mean, in the new world of, I think, I have a soft spot for Chile, of course, and I think, to be honest, you guys in the US do not see the great wines of Chile. You do not see Chadwick, you do not see Senya, You do not see Don Maximignano. You don't see Altair. You don't see Carmen. You don't see the really good Santa Rita, Casa Real. I mean, you just don't see these wines. And you got to search for them. You got to look for them, and then trying to find a younger vintage is really hard. But yeah, I'm a huge Bordeaux fan, but I'm a Pomerol fan. I'm more of a Merlot fan than I am a Cabernet fan from Bordeaux. I'm not a big. I'm not. I mean, I've tried not a lot of first growths, but I've tried many of them. And I'm more of a Latour fan, because for me, Latour is a softer, richer, more approachable wine. But I get just as I'm more concerned about the cleanliness of French wine. I'm not a very big. I don't accept Brettanomyces, which is a spoilage yeast. I'm pretty fussy about that. So in general, I only drink French wines when I know the producer and the person. And that also goes back to, the drinking experience itself. When you go to a restaurant, when I go to a restaurant, I order food that I can't pronounce. I take a chance. I take a risk. When I look at the wine list, I think it's hilarious if I see somebody plonk a bottle of, you name it, the famous brand of Napa Valley on their table, and I order but 2 or 3 bottles of something else that's less recognized. Why would you go to a restaurant and order a filet mignon, medium rare, and a bottle of blah, blah, blah oak? I can do that at home. Where's the experience? Where's the risk? When you go out for dinner, this is the risk that you can take. Try an experiment, try something different, try something new. Do not buy something that you can buy at 7-Eleven.
Okay. Number 3, if reaching for a red blend, would you prefer one that includes Cabernet Sauvignon, or is there another preferred blend?
Okay, that's a really good question. Touche. Yeah, I mean, I've been part of some very famous red blends. I mean, Senior that I mentioned is a red blend. Milestone from Clos de Bois, or there's a lot of red blends out there. But yeah, the answer to the question is Cabernet. Actually, the best red blends in the world involve a lot of Cabernet. I hate to admit it. So making great red blends usually involves 70% Cabernet. Right. I hate to admit it. I don't like that question. It was a very good question. I mean, I'm talking Bordeaux blends. I mean, if I'm talking Rhone blends or other things, then different answer. But if you're talking Bordeaux blends, and a Cabernet's still got to be the major piece. It has the structure.
I think you should stick to your guns and not equivocate, because that was a very non-politician answer. You came out there with an affirmative, and I like that. You don't see that much these days.
Well, in some cooler climates, cooler climates, I'm using a lot of co-fermentation. So in Canada, for instance, in the Okanagan, I work in the Okanagan a lot. I was there last week. Merlot and getting the tannins in Okanagan. Remember, it's a shorter season and it's hot. I mean, they had 120 degrees there for a week, 2 weeks, so that's hot. And so the short, and so the tannins evolve differently. So we do a lot of co-fermentation. You're co-fermenting with about 4 or 5% Semillon or Viognier in a red, using a white grape in a red. And it just cuts the tannins just down a little bit and increases the color, because it's called a co-pigmentation reaction. And so there are other things. And so the part of the answer is, when do you blend? So we're doing that blending obviously during the harvest, but when I'm sitting here ready to bottle the wine, that's a different time. And at that time, I'm looking at 70% Cab.
Quick question of my own. I've been to the Okanagan Valley in Canada, and not many Americans know about it, but how are the wine? It's been a few years. What's your opinion on the wine quality coming out of there right now?
Phenomenal.
All right, I got to check it out again. Okay.
But there's a big difference there's 4 lakes. It goes Okanagan, Vassar, Scar, Osoyoos. So if you're in Osoyoos crosses into Washington State. So Osoyoos is hot. really hot. Naramata Bench is, west facing and it's mid valley. And then you got Kelowna to the north. So you got this mass, it takes 2 hours or 2.5 hours to drive the valley. So, and it's a very narrow valley, and they have this thing called the McIntyre's Bluff, which is blocked the ice. So the ice came blocked by McIntyre, eventually it broke through, and that's what created the two southern lakes. So it's really interesting soils. They're very granite, very sandy. I think Chardonnay, New World Chardonnay from the Oregon, and the problem is the taxes, and you'll never see them here in the US. So it's our governments have got to sit down and talk about this tax problem and see if we can loosen it up a little bit.
Right on. All right, last question, Nick. What foods would you recommend pairing with a bold Napa Cab? And the questioner says, I always lean towards red meat, but is there anything unexpected that you find pairs well?
Well, as I said earlier, I eat cheese with Napa Cab. I find in general Napa Cabernets are too strong for food. Yeah. And by the end of the evening, my palate's tired because I've already just drunk a bottle of sparkling, a bottle of Chardonnay, and a bottle of Alexander Valley Cabernet before I get to the Napa. So, and it's funny that we do that. It was interesting during COVID, my son, who's a winemaker, said, Dad, look, we open 5 or 6 bottles every night because there's so many, there's 9 people in my bubble. Let's reverse the order of the wines. So we started drinking the Napa Cabernets at the beginning of the evening and finishing with the sparklings at the beginning of the evening, and then finish with the sparklings at the end of the evening. And it changes the way you think about wines. And we normally go from light to heavy, but heaviness is a problem because by the end of the night, they're so heavy, they're like your palate's exhausted. So maybe you should try the heavy wines at the beginning and try and mix it up. I don't know. But I prefer, as I said, I prefer to drink the Alexander Valleys with the main part of the dinner because I find the acidity much better than Napa Valley. And yeah, I mean, I live in South America 3-4 months a year. Obviously, I eat steak and arugula. That's all I eat. I don't, the carbs, the sweetness of the carbs ruins the wine. So I stay away from those those food groups. I'm much more fussy when it comes to eating with Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay because I'm always looking for the pairing. I think one thing I learned, I work very closely with some chefs, and one thing, like if you drink I'll give you one lesson here. If you drink a young red wine, the best food to have with that is eggplant, because eggplant has so much tannin in it, it's so bitter, the wine will taste sweet. So you want to have more of it. You want to have, if you think of it, just think about that from a, so you want more of it in the food than what's in the wine. If there's more of it in the wine than there is in the food, the wine won't taste very good. So when you're thinking about your pairings, like when you're thinking about like asparagus with Sauvignon Blanc, a classic situation, asparagus with, and then but if you put lemon juice on the asparagus, completely different flavor profile for the Sauvignon Blanc. Suddenly the Sauvignon Blanc tastes sweet because there's more acid on the asparagus. So just think about how your palate perceives, and, we talk about hot, salty, spicy, the milky, the textural compounds in the sauces. But, the interesting one is the spice, so spice is the hardest one to pair with because we don't have a lot of spicy wines, People talk about Riesling, but I think the reason why they drink Riesling is because it's colder. Has that, I don't know, it doesn't seem to work for me.
All right, so I'm going to chime in here because we live in Texas and we like spicy foods. So I'm going to tell you 2 pairings that I know go really well with the Verge because I've road tested these. Fajitas, beef fajitas, right off the bottom, go great with the Verge. And, I normally have jalapeno peppers and all kinds of things that you wouldn't typically think of pairing with wine when I make that fajita, but it works. And then Texas barbecue. You get a good brisket or ribs, even spicy sauces. The Verge cuts right through that, is a great compliment. If anything, it just makes you want to drink it more. So both of those work because I've tested them.
Well, the fajita,
I don't know if that works California.
Yeah.
Not in
No,
Canada.
the fajita is 100% correct with the pepper, because remember, Cabernet is a spicy variety. The spiciest variety is Carmenere, then Sauvignon Blanc, and then Cabernet. So if you put a pepper with Cabernet, bang, you're doing exactly what I just said. You're adding more pepper, more spice to your mouth than what's in the wine. So suddenly the Cabernet is going to taste sweet.
Right on.
I love it. I'll use that as an example for sure.
Okay, well, next time you're here in Texas, we're going to have to test that out with you. And I'll do the barbecue as well, because we've got some
I'm
good
sure you
barbecue.
can.
And the Verge Cab goes great. And I think all of these wines that we tasted today would go great. But that acidity and spiciness of the Verge, it's a perfect pairing. Nick, once again, it's a pleasure to see you. I can't wait to see you in person. So cheers, my friend.
Anytime. Salute. Thanks for your time.